Hello and welcome, I'm Aaron Rutten, and in this video we'll learn the art of tracing in Rebelle. Tracing is a powerful technique for developing your drawing skills, practicing composition, and creating art with the aid of a reference. Let's get started. First things first, you'll need a reference image. I'll choose this photo of a coconut sliced in half. I'll link you to that in the video description. The image needs to be large and high resolution enough to see the details in it. A low-resolution image will just look blurry if you try to enlarge it. If I show you a low-resolution version of this coconut, you can barely make out the husk fibers and other features. If you can't see it, you can't trace it. But also keep in mind that your artwork might not need to be super high resolution, so just aim for a medium-sized reference image or larger. Once you have your reference, open Rebelle and create a new canvas. It's a good idea to base your canvas size on the aspect ratio of your reference image to ensure everything fits nicely. You don't have to make the canvas match the photo because you may want to place your subject somewhere else, like on a background or alongside other subjects. But in this case, I only want to focus on the coconut. The coconut fits nicely on a square canvas, so that's what I'll use. I'll go with 8 by 8 inches at 300 dpi, but you can choose something larger if you like. I'll go to Select Canvas and choose the canvas texture for the background. I'll create the canvas with these settings. Next, I'll name the blank layer Background and use the Paint Bucket tool to tone it an eggshell color. That's a desaturated color in the yellow-orange range. As you may have noticed, I have customized my workspace a bit. Any of these panels can be found in the window menu. You can control-click on the color picker to divide it into sections like I have done here. I've chosen the 9x9 and 36 grids. This will simplify the color selection process and make it easier for you to follow along. You may also notice these custom brushes I created. I will come back to that. You can follow along with the default Rebelle brushes too. I'll be painting in a thick oil style, so anything from the oils/acrylics category will work. Let's look inside the visual settings so I can show you what settings I chose. If you're on a slower computer, you may want to disable these rendering settings. Keeping them on will give you the most realistic looking paint. I'll zoom out a bit, and now we are ready to bring in our reference. I'll open the reference images palette and load my image. Click on it, and it will appear in its own panel. Resize it to fit in the corner of the UI. Make it large enough to see clearly, but leave plenty of room for the canvas. I'll click on the eyeball in the reference panel, then open the menu to the right of it and increase the opacity to 35%. The image becomes faintly visible on the canvas. You may want to play with this to find the right opacity while you are tracing. In my case, this is enough to still see the important details I want to trace, but also allows me to see the pencil lines I will be drawing. Next, I'll select the Transform button in this same menu and enlarge the reference so it fills more of the canvas. I'll make it somewhat centered. I'll press Enter to apply the change. Let's save our progress so far. It's best to save your working documents as the native Reb format. I'll create numbered versions so we can see our progress. Let's start tracing a sketch to get the correct shape and proportions of our subject. The rest of the illustration will be based on the sketch, but will include much more detail. This sketch will be temporary and can be discarded when it's no longer needed. You could skip the sketch and just paint right over the reference, but that's a different technique that I cover in a different tutorial. First, create a new layer in the Layers panel. Name this layer Sketch. This is where we will start our tracing. I'll drag this above the background layer if necessary. I'll also set the blend mode to multiply so it blends darker with underlying colors. I'll select the Favorites brush tool. For digital art, I highly recommend using a stylus since it offers much more accuracy than your finger or a mouse. As for the brush to use, I have an excellent sketching pencil in my Rebelle starter pack. I'll link you to that in the video description. Of course, you can also use any of the default Rebelle brushes as well. There is an entire category of pencils. Start lightly sketching over your reference image, focusing on the main shapes and lines. It's really just some ellipse shapes and a curve. Rotate the canvas, and that will make it easier to draw these curves. If your tablet supports multi-touch, that is one of the best ways to rotate. You can also hold R to rotate or use the controls in the navigator. Since we will be using this tracing as a starting point for a painting, we only need to indicate where the details will be, not draw the details entirely. For example, the coconut fibers are very fine and intricate, and I could spend hours drawing them with this pencil. But once I begin painting over the sketch, all of that previous detail will be wasted. So to clarify, we are making a temporary sketch here, not a finished drawing. Eventually, we will use the natural thickness of the paint to create a lot of the coconut texture and detail. If it's hard to see certain details, you can place a duplicate of your reference image on a separate device like a phone or computer screen. Or you can increase the reference opacity as needed. And don't worry about drawing the wrong lines. You certainly can undo, but that will waste a lot of time. It may be more efficient to clean up the unwanted lines with an eraser near the end of the sketch. There is the eraser mode, or you can select from eraser brushes. Once your sketch is complete, hide your reference layer by clicking on the eye icon. This allows you to see your sketch more clearly. If you are satisfied with your sketch, it's now ready to turn into a detailed painting. As I mentioned earlier, I will be creating an oil painting, but you could also choose a style like ink lines, watercolor, or anything else. I'll link you to some tips for other styles in the video description. I'll save as to save another version. I will use this sketch to guide my brush strokes. I'll create a new layer below the sketch layer and name it Husk. Next, choose a thick paintbrush that you like. My natural oil brush works great, but there are also lots of default brushes in the oil/acrylics category. I'll select a medium reddish-brown color. This will be the general color of the coconut that you can see in the reference. You can pick the color by eye or sample it directly from the reference image. I want to sample from the shadow side of the coconut. This brush creates a really natural-looking stroke with thickness, color variation, and bristle marks. Light pressure will cause the brush to blend. You can adjust the size to make the brush larger or smaller, and the loading to put more or less paint on the brush. I'll reset the brush. I'll make sure to paint on the husk layer. Take your time and paint behind your sketch, creating a smooth silhouette of the coconut. You need not follow the sketch exactly if you feel the brushstrokes are an improvement. Since this is meant to look like a traditional painting in an impressionist style, it can be a little rough. I'll use lighter pressure to flatten out some of the impasto in the cross-section area. Once that layer is finished, hide it since it makes it difficult to see the sketch. Next, I'll create another layer above the husk and name it Dark. I'll use a smaller brush with a dark brown color to paint those dark areas in the reference. Show the reference if you like, to make it easier to see those areas. These lines also help to show the form and contours of the subject. Don't forget the dark ring around the coconut meat. Hide the reference and show the husk layer again to see how they look together. Touch up the paint as needed. As you are working, keep an eye on your work in the preview panel. You may want to place this near your reference. This will help you see the painting both up close and from a distance. You can better visualize the painting this way. You can use the erase mode to cut into your paint to create negative space too. It would be difficult to exactly match the reference image, so I am just trying to get the impression of the features. Since we are sampling colors from the reference, it would be best to sample the background color and fill the background layer with that using a large brush and short strokes. You can adjust the impasto thickness per layer. I'll make the background and husk a little thinner. Now let's make another new layer above the other paint layers for meat. I'll use a medium brush to fill in the lighter areas with an almost white color. Follow the contours of the form, and then flatten out the impasto in the middle using lighter pressure. You'll also want to sample the inner shadow color, which is basically the background color, and go over the white to add form and shadows. Flatten out the impasto again. Next, enable lock transparency, and add some of the lines in the coconut meat. These are a slightly different shade of warm gray. Let's indicate this edge here too. At this point, we are just blocking in the main colors. We will add more detail next. You can hide your sketch layer to reveal just your clean paint. I think that's a good start. Let's save another iteration. Now we are ready to take these rough shapes and colors and refine them by adding detail to turn this into a finished painting. I'll hold Z to zoom in to the reference more. You can pan by holding spacebar. Let's start by adding some light and color variation to our blocked in areas to give them a clearer form and definition. On the meat layer, I'll use a medium natural oil brush to paint and blend to clean up the center of the coconut. V toggles between painting and blending. I need the correct balance of sharp and soft transitions and brightness, or this will not look concave. I'll simplify the lighting here a bit so that it's easier to understand. Where these white edges meet, you will need to use contrast to emphasize these are two separate planes. The inside of the bowl shape will catch the most light, so that should be the brightest white. The rest of the meat should be darker than that, but not darker than the shadow inside the bowl. The shadow inside the bowl should fade gradually from dark to light. You can also use the thickness of the paint to further emphasize the contrast. I'll clean up the sharp edges next. Keep an eye on your smaller preview to get a feel for how this shading is coming together. If you've got something like this, then your shape is looking good. I'll use a smaller brush like my detail wet brush to paint directional strokes to give the cut edge some texture. There are default brushes you can use too. I'll also break up the shadows a bit, and make sure to use some of that color to separate the husk from the meat. These dark areas on the left are cast shadows from the coconut husk and fibers. The more linear shadows are the texture of the coconut, with some faces being tilted away from the light and in shadow. Some lines come from the center, and some come from the outer edges. This is meant to be a quick impressionist style painting, so don't overdo it on the fine details. Now we can go to the husk layer, enable lock transparency, select a lighter reddish brown, and block in some of that on the light side with natural oil. Use the thickness of the paint to create the texture, and don't cover all of the medium brown. Leave the dark brown mostly exposed. Make the brown get darker as you move toward the shadow side. You can either darken the color or lower the paint loading. Don't worry about these unruly fibers yet. We will handle those separately. I'll choose an even lighter color and add some of that on the lightest side. Darken and dull it slightly and use it for reflected light on the far shadow side. Go even lighter with the lightish red-brown for some sparse highlights. Then overlay some of the darker and lighter colors with a thin brush like detail wet so that there is a lot of fine detail in the husk. Disable lock transparency and blend the edges with natural oil to pull out some fibers so the edge is not flat. Use the eraser mode to clean it up if you overdo it. Next, I'll go to the dark layer, enable lock transparency, and use a smaller brush with a lighter color to reflect some light off the inner husk. After that, I'll use a very thin brush like detail wet to paint with those lighter browns around the inner edge, leaving a slight gap of dark between the husk and the meat. On the meat layer, I'll add the reddish brown color along the edge between the two adjacent light colors of the coconut meat. I'll blend it to merge it in. I can also add some realism by painting a shadow on a separate layer set to the multiply blend mode. I'll use a darker background color and the natural oil brush. I will change the angle and intensity of the shadow a bit to make it more interesting. The core of the shadow should be the darkest. I'll switch to the blend mode and soften the edges to fade them out. Flatten out the impasto a bit by blending and using the layer settings. If your colors are a bit off, feel free to use filters on each layer to correct them. If you want to really make this look more interesting, you can shift your shadows to make them cooler in hue. I'll make the shadows a little purple. This is a creative choice, and you can certainly just keep it more monochromatic. Viewing your artwork in grayscale with G and setting the reference to grayscale will help you see the color values more easily. That will give us the bulk of the painting, but now we need to take it to the next level by adding fine details like the husk fibers. I'll save another iteration. Let's bring this painting closer to completion with some fine details. A lot of artists would stop here, but I want this to be a great painting, not just a good painting. I'll start by adding these husk fibers that go every which way. I'll make 2 layers for those, one behind and one above the coconut layers. If it helps, you could add color labels to the layers to help you recognize which layers are related to each other. I'll paint on the behind fibers first. I can sample colors from the canvas to make it faster and more accurate. Make sure your sampling is set to sample from all layers. I'll add some thick fibers with the natural oil brush at a small size. Roughen the top edge a bit, too. Next, I'll add finer strokes over it with detail wet or a similar thin brush. You can blend and paint to do this. The fibers should have their own shading with highlights and shadows. Use bright highlights on the fibers since some may catch the light. And don't make them all identical. Use unique shapes. Keep in mind this footage is sped up, so take your time here. Now repeat that on the above layer, and don't avoid overlapping the meat and other layers. I'll use a more yellow-orange here and there too. Some of this can be used to separate the meat from the husk. Next, I'll select the natural oil brush and darken the core shadow using another layer set to multiply. This shadow should be as dark as the darkest areas of the husk. Blend it out to merge it into the lighter shadow. Don't let the shadow bleed too far out. If it does, smudge it back inward. Check your work in grayscale to make sure the shadow looks right. I'll select the detail wet brush, and on a new layer above the meat, I'll add some speckles of reddish brown and white debris, which would result from splitting the coconut in half. I'll reduce the impasto on those. I don't want to overdo the fine details since I want this to look more impressionistic, so I will stop. Let's save our progress again. It can be helpful to look at your previous iterations to see how far your painting has come. As we near the end of this painting, it would be a good time to take a break and come back later. This gives you a better chance of noticing mistakes. Save a copy of your work as a PNG and look at it later on a phone or another device. Make note of anything you see that needs correction. Be sure to directly compare it to the reference. I'd also recommend studying additional references to give you a broader understanding of your subject. Just because you traced a sketch from a reference doesn't guarantee your illustration will look accurate. To draw accurately, you need to be able to identify where you made mistakes. I can definitely see some areas I'd like to reshape a bit. Since there are so many layers to change, it would be more efficient to delete the sketch and merge all the layers together and then work on everything at once. I can hold Shift to select all the layers and merge them with Ctrl-E. Now I can paint and blend anywhere. I'll use natural oil to soften the darkest edge of the coconut where it meets the ground shadow. I'll also correct the angles on some of the coconut meat. It may be helpful to draw guides on a new layer with a ruler to help you visualize the angles. I'll blend the merged layer edges here and there to make everything fit together. I need to push the coconut meat edge a bit to make the ring shape more even. After that, I'll overlay strokes of varying sizes to help the flow of paint look more natural. I can add in more highlights and shadows as well. You may also want to revisit the visual settings and play with them to see if it improves the realism of the paint. I'll add a new layer and paint in some background color over the inner bowl shape to improve the color. I'll reduce the opacity to blend it in. I'll add a few more strokes on the husk and drop some shadows underneath the fibers. I also think I need more highlights on the light side. I'll add that to a new layer to keep everything else safe. I can add and merge layers like this as needed. I want to emphasize those cracks in the husk. I will have to restrain myself from adding any more. I don't want to overdo it with the details. I'll save again. The painting looks pretty good to me, so I will stop here. This was about 4 hours of work. Tracing took up about 15 minutes, so it was only a small part of this process. I am fully capable of hand drawing this coconut without tracing, but it's already tedious enough to paint, so why not save time where I can? That's more time I can use to make more art. Don't feel bad about tracing if that's how you want to do it. You'll notice I didn't try to copy the reference exactly. My version looks more dramatic in terms of lighting, color, contrast, and texture. Keep your original with layers as a reb file, and save as to make copies for print and web use. Choose JPEG, PNG, or WebP for posting to the web. And there you have it, that's how you paint a coconut in Rebelle. I hope this tutorial was helpful. If you're interested in taking your Rebelle skills to the next level, be sure to check out my full Rebelle training course available at aaronrutten.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.